This video is directly a response to a video by Moxie. And if you want to see her video, go check it out there. I recommend you do for more context, as this video is not in disrespect, but it's actually looking at this as a big source of inspiration. This video is the reason why I'm making this video. As a Zelda fan, I felt that it was time for me to put my opinion out there as well. And this is the total story. By total story, I mean I want to look at the second-hand story of The Legend of Zelda that is taking place. I want to take a look at the environment. I want to take a look at things that are occurring that is not broadly spoken about in The Legend of Zelda. Many of us believe that The Legend of Zelda is the story of a warrior by the name of Link, who is a bloodline warrior who will always rise up to take on Ganon. But what if I told you this was a trap card set by the goddesses in order to keep some form of equilibrium amongst the people who inhabit the world that was created by the three goddesses, as well as Zelda being that of wisdom, also being some form of creation by the goddesses in order to keep equilibrium in the world. It is speculated within Moxie's video in one way or another that the Hyrulean bloodline and those who are in charge conspire in some way to hide magic. However, I don't believe this to be true, and we'll get into that. And then also we have Din, or power, and the creation of Ganon. What's also very important to understand is in this context you have two Hylians and one... Hold up. We got to clarify something first. There's a headcanon and common belief that Link is either a mixed blood or he's definitely not pure Hylian. And this is a conjecture that I personally believe. There is a possibility, and it might not be strong, but it does exist in the storytelling that exists in Zelda Ocarina of Time, where it states that Link was dropped off into the forest by a female who is now presumed to be dead. We do not know the information about who Link's father is. And if you just go by physical information, he definitely has the pointed ears of that of a Hylian. However, throughout the story structure, we find that he has been referred to by several names, including Fairy Boy and other names of the sort. It is my personal belief that Link is a mixed blood of multiple different entities. He has a possibility of being both a Hylian and a Korok, as we do know in Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time that the Koroks were once a human-like entity living in amongst the forest. It is possible that if you leave the forest, you will begin to age like everybody else, and by returning, it will suspend your aging process. This isn't something that we see, as many of the children who are of the Korok forest are perceptively have been there for an extremely long period of time, hiding amongst the magic, which I'll get into. But it is a possibility that one of these Korok people fled and went to the Nyrulean capital, aka Hyrule, another thing that we will get into later, and had a mixed breed child, and the mother fled and returned Link to the Korok Forest for safekeeping, knowing that many of the people who were there had been there for an extremely long period of time. However, this conjecture is not extremely necessary to the greater story, but it is definitely important, especially considering the relationship that Link has with other characters. It is completely possible that mixed breeding and mixed races is completely normal in the land of Hyrule, and we see this as other characters of different races fall in love or even profoundly state their love for Link, including Wind Waker, where a fairy states that he is exactly her type, and in other titles where it is different species or races in this case, stating that they have feelings for Link or they look up to him in a way that is romanticized. Anyways, on with the video. Power and the creation of Ganon. What's also very important to understand is in this context, you have two Hylians and one Gerudo. These separate entities or separate people are all of different bloodlines. They are of different relation in context of the goddesses. It is also speculated that although Din, Fiore, Nehru are all friendly to each other, it is also shown that that might not be the truth, and that in some way the humanity, as it were in this context, is what spoiled or broke down the relations between the different goddesses. And that brings me to the conversation of divinity magic and what we understand as divinity magic. Now, before I tell you the story that I have in my head canon, I want to state that this is heavily speculation, and I will do my best in post to put everything together in a narrative that makes sense, as well as put context in front of the things that I'm saying. This is one of the most difficult videos I've ever wanted to create, and I'm so happy to find this inspiration, and I hope it leads to some good headcanon, some good fan fodder, and some good responses, because I think what I'm about to say might be extremely important. Fiore, the goddess of wind, life, all sorts of stuff, and also the goddess that blessed the Link bloodline. We don't know much about Link, where he came from, who he is, and to be completely frank, none of that really matters in the grand scheme of things, because the story of The Legend of Zelda is not about Link saving a princess in order to defeat Ganon. No, this is a story about a greater struggle. Before the time began, before spirits in life existed, 3 golden goddesses descended upon the chaos that was Hyrule. Din, the goddess of power. Nehru, the goddess of wisdom. Fiore, the goddess of courage. Din. With her strong flaming arms, she cultivated the land and created the Red Earth. Nehru poured her wisdom onto the earth and gave the spirit of law to the world. Aurora, with her rich soul, produced all life forms who would uphold the law. The 3 great goddesses, their labors completed, departed from the heavens, and golden sacred triangles remained at the point where the goddesses left the world. Since then, the sacred triangles have become the basis of our world's providence, and the resting place of the triangles has become the sacred realm. In the grand scheme of things, because the story of The Legend of Zelda is not about Link saving a princess in order to defeat Ganon. No, this is a story about a greater struggle, about the flaws of the goddesses, the flaws of the magic itself. I constantly argue with people that Nehru's magic is extremely flawed because flawed magic seems to be very popular in the Legend of Zelda grand story. But to take a look at one of the flaws, we need to look at Wind Waker. Within the story of Wind Waker, we see the world being flooded and Hyrule being saved. This makes sense because if Nehru blessed the Hyrulean bloodline, or in this case the Zelda bloodline, to always have the firstborn daughter carry the force magic, or in this case Nehru's magic and knowledge of the different types of divinity magic, in order to use force magic, well, it would make sense to protect that bloodline. By eliminating that bloodline, you have eliminated your tool and asset in order to protect the world. For a moment, you have to stop and think about the goals and the tools in which the gods created Hyrule, or in this case, re-established Hyrule as a functioning world. Feore is a being who focuses on life, nature, and provides a sense of structure to uphold the laws as created by Nehru. And Nehru's entire goal was to establish some form of understanding, some form of structure in civilization. There is inherent conflict of interest here, whereas Din might have been more of a they should die and there needs to be a cycle of life and all things should be structured in a certain way. In the beginning, these three goddesses worked in tandem in order to functionally create a world which has a system which should function to uphold itself. However, looking at the story structure of The Legend of Zelda, this is not the case. Feor falls into the exact same boat, creating courage magic, or in this case, Link and the bloodline to protect the world. Whereas Nehru wants to lead and protect the world through wisdom, knowledge, and the protection through the use of technology, the use of magic in viewing items. Feor's magic is more about spiritualism and connecting to the world through nature and building civilizations off of the land. And this is the contentious part. You have Din's magic. Din is the goddess of power and or Ganondorf. And Ganondorf was the trap card, as it were, of the Gerudo people, a bloodline that the male being born into the Gerudo bloodline would be imbued with the Triforce of power and rise to take the seed of the world. However, these goddesses were flawed in nature because they were constantly at each other's throats with who deserved to run the world, which is why the bloodlines were created and they were given all of the special treatment. This creates a segregation in the world amongst those of magic and those of not magic. So, understanding that Ganondorf, the representation of power, his understanding of the world, or his goal, would to be learning about as much magic as he can in order to use power to control the world, which is something that we see within the story structure. Ganon is often referred to as a magician, and this makes sense because if he is imbued with power, his goal would to be understanding every type of magic in order to assimilate some form of divinity, some form of divinity power. Many people speculate what Ganondorf's wish would be, and if his goal is to destroy Hyrule, which I don't think that's the case. To me, it seems more like Ganon is a usurper. He wants to usurp Nehru in order to lead the world using an iron fist, whereas Nehru's magic would be that of wisdom, some form of collective understanding of all magic and use of magic in order to rule the world with logic and intelligence. Whereas Feore's magic, if Link were to ever rise to power, but as it seems that never was the goal of Feore, and each one of these independent people that were created as trap cards against each other have free will. Therefore, the king, queen, and Zelda have the right to rule with their own perspective, as well as Ganondorf and his minions, as well as Link if he were to ever choose to lead. Therefore, you have the flaws of the god and the flaws of the people dictating the world as it were, which also created an endless cycle of war. Now we can take that understanding and take it a little bit further. If we take a look at the subsects of people within the religious practices of the world of Legend of Zelda, we can understand that there is segregation and dividing of people amongst the world. There is some form of segregation constantly occurring. The Koroks in Ocarina of Time are subjugated or even self-subjugated to stay in the Lost Woods and the Forbidden Forest and all of that stuff. And Feore seems to be of the weakest of all of them. But if the goddesses have their own flaws and their own conflict and are not directly resolving it on Earth, as it were, we can understand that this is of the people. This is of the people's doing. There is still free will. There is no fate deciding anything. With that kind of stuff in context, you can take a look at Zelda Ut again and take a look at Nehru's being, or Zelda, and the bloodline of wisdom. It would make sense that the wisdom bloodline take a throne because they are those of intellect. They are the ones that are leading people. And it would make sense that Feore's people don't exactly get along with Nehru's people, as well as the Gerudo people not getting along with the Hylian people. This can all also be tied back to color theory and the conflict of color itself. In order for the world to find true peace, all three of these nations need to find peace amongst each other. And that brings us to the Triforce itself, which is actually a lot more interesting in speculation than some people are making it out to be. Starting with Feore, and the understanding that Feore is the goddess that blessed the bloodline of Link, we also see Link very connected to the Koroks throughout the story. Koroks are people of the woods. They are naturists, they are herbalists, but they are also that of life. Many of the Koroks are childs forever in some form of perpetual immortality, only to be killed when slain, and their magic is extremely interesting because the magic of the Koroks is that of concealment. Many of the Koroks state, "Oh, you can see me. Oh, how did you find me? How did you get here?" There's a lot of that, a lot of hiding, a lot of disappearing into the woods, and this is a yin-yang effect. Although the Koroks are a people of peace and segregation who want to be set aside and left alone, the magic is also that of life. We see that through the Ut intro cutscene. Feore's magic is very important to everybody. Everybody needs to understand the Feore magic in some sense. Within the lines of color theory, magic is green. Plants are green. We see magic coming from plants. We see plants throughout Wind Waker that sap magic. We see the Deku Tree, which is magic itself. There is a lot of magic involved in the Korok people, and that could be used as a fear tactic when it comes to propagation from other sects. Say if Nehru, or the people of Nehru in this context, are destroying forests to build fortresses to protect from power, whereas the Koroks are using their magic of concealment to create lost woods, so a army could not invade. They would get lost within the woods and eventually just dissipate, desert, or die off in the woods and feed back to the life of the woods itself. But with everything, there is a yin and a yang. It is to my understanding that Feore, when blessing and creating the trap card that was the Link bloodline, it is understood that Feore went against her own beliefs. This means that Link had to be a swordsman, a warrior, the last assault to protect the Koroks. Let's say the Korok people were attacked by the power. They would have one severe power struggle, and that is their combat ability. Feore, being a being of nature, life, and preservation, Link was created as a destroyer. This means on his own, Link is not a very powerful individual. This would also imply that Link needs to be subservient in some way to Feore, which is probably why we don't see Link using a lot of magic in his early times in each game. Link himself must use other forms of magic, much like other people, in order to gain the abilities of protecting the Korok or the world life itself. Many people think that Link is only there to protect against Ganon. This does not really appear to be the case. It would appear to me that Link was created in order to protect the world. His bloodline and divinity in this case was a fork of the Triforce of protection of everything. We don't see Link directly wanting to kill anyone. His goal never seems to be destroying anything in particular, only those of the things that get in his way, and many other people tell him to do the things he is supposed to do, which then leads to him obtaining tools and magic in order to defeat Ganon. He is never consciously making these decisions. It might be the King of Red Lions dictating his path in order to defeat Ganon. It might be Zelda and the trickery of the Sheikah people that also dictate the path that Link must take. Link's goal was never to destroy Ganon, it is just a consequence of his creation. Princess Zelda is the most complicated of all of them and will take the most time to discuss and understand. Throughout the story, I would like you to reference this portion of the video to understand why Zelda is the way she is. From what we can understand, and what I understand as this is some form of speculation, Zelda is constantly ignorant of her own abilities and is often suppressed in many ways to using those abilities. She is not a being of combat. No. The Hylian people build fortresses, they build towns, they build warriors, they build armies. This is a form of wisdom. They use tools and different things to get their goal and never exactly use magic, as they understand magic to be something different. Magic in the land of Nehruyan people, or Hylians, or, if you go to Zelda Oot, there's towns, there's people, there's markets, there's a castle, there's order and structure, unlike the Koroks, or in Ganon's case, the thieves' hideout. There is more of an anarchical type of role being portrayed, where there is more of a monarchy style occurring within Nehru's structure. There is a political line to everything here, but we're not going to delve too deep into that. But understanding that Nehru's people are that of organization and using power in a physical sense, it is important to understand that their knowledge and library of understanding is therefore also a secret. Much like Zelda, her powers are a secret to her. She needs to be awoken in some way, and this is also dichotomous with the Master Sword, which we'll get into a little bit later. But Zelda also, being a being of great understanding, has a awesome yin and yang, where that power that is awesome is also very detrimental. With a great understanding of Nehru's magic and great understanding of resources, divinity magic can be used by those of the royal bloodline. Now, when I talk about divinity magic, understand that I will get into that later. Zelda's power needs to be awoken within her in order for her to use the magic, and often that magic is extremely taxing. As we see in Breath of the Wild, the use of some form of force magic is extremely detrimental, and can also probably lead to great destruction. With great destruction is why we constantly see it being used in some way of containment. This would mean that the Feyor versus Din is the actual practice that is occurring, as Nehru is trying to keep some form of balance within her wisdom in order to not destroy the world and intervene in ways to protect the world from being destroyed. Zelda's goal was never to capture, destroy, or even eliminate Ganon at all, and from our understanding that is impossible, as each bloodline must constantly be recreated, that until some form of alliance or understanding can be met and divinity magic can be properly practiced and understood. Therefore, Zelda is a middle ground. She is the paper to the rock, paper, scissors, essentially. She is able to be destroyed by Link. However, Link would not destroy Zelda, as his goal is not to destroy Zelda or anything in that nature. Her role is to lead Link into a way of understanding his abilities and his powers and work together in tandem with that magic in order to stop Ganon. Ganon is trying to usurp both of them and take control over the forks of the Triforce, all three of them, in order to rule with an iron fist. Nehru will not allow this to take place, and Feyor, although understanding that her role in the yin and yang here is to protect the land and life, must get involved due to the destruction of Din's power, and that results in the loss of life and the destruction of forest. The people who follow Feore would not follow Nehru because Nehru destroys forests and destroys life in order to create some semblance of civilization. Civilization comes at the cost of many lives and many things such as plant life. So the separation of the Korak people, who are Feor followers, would retreat into the woods in order to protect their land, whereas Nehru would set up some kind of divide. This is why in The Legend of Zelda and many other stories, you would see the Korok people first, then you would see the Nehruian people, and then you would see the Din people. This is setting up a story element that states that in some way the Feyruian people, or people who follow Feyru, would be the aggregators of Nehruian, and Nehruian would be the middle of fighting against the war of power and utilizing different structures in order to win, and different people and different abilities in order to win. There is no direct correlation or relation that the Hyrulean family is a tyrant of the lands, as many people have put forward. Many of that is just speculation, and within the grounds of speculation is perfectly fine, especially in the context that I am putting forth. It is easy to say that Zelda is a people of power and control, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. It seems that the yin and yang here is that Zelda herself is ignorant of her abilities, and the goal is to protect the people, even if it means protecting them from magic itself, which then brings us to power itself and what it means to use Din's magic. There's a striking problem in the conversation that has been put forth so far, and that is, what is Link's divinity? What is the power that Link wields that has the power of the divine or force magic? If each magic is representative of the independent goddesses and is an independent fork of the three pillars of magic, Nehru, Feore, and Din, and if Nehru has Zelda, and Zelda learns a form of divinity, and Din has Ganon, and Ganon learns a form of divinity in the tools of Malice, these two forms of divinity are important to understand why they would be the ones to butt head the most often. One is protecting the library of knowledge, the other is fighting to have all of the power. So what is Link's goal? Well, if Link is the hero of courage, that would imply that Link's divinity comes from the tools and assets that he utilizes in order to overcome his obstacles. Anything that Link has to use, including the Master Sword, is some form of magical property. Think of the hookshot not ripping off his arm, and his incredible abilities to use tools. It would almost seem as if Feore is imbuing things with its own form of magical power. So, in the context of that, like how Link can use magical spin attacks in Ocarina of Time, those spin attacks could be associated with the tools that Feore has imbued with Link. But this doesn't answer the greater question. What is Link's divine ability? We don't directly see Link use divine abilities, so it is under my assertion that Link doesn't have a divine context. His divinity comes from the people. Those people are the ones who created both the Sage Collective as well as the Master Sword. The sages are there as representatives of court to both watch over and pay attention to what the world is currently facing. These sages and their jobs is not only to be aware of the bloodlines, but also be aware when the hero of time needs the sword in order to reseal Ganon away if he breaks out. To my understanding, Ganon cannot die. If Ganon dies, he just comes back. Much like a FNAF joke, he always comes back. This is why the people of Hyrule attempt to seal away Ganon instead of directly killing Ganon. The divinity magic that we see Zelda use is usually some form of containment. I would assume that this magic was also representative of the Master Sword, using containment to hold in the three powers of the god to have some form of physical representation of the divine magic. This divinity is why we also have to re-imbue the sword multiple times in order for it to work against Ganon. A puny dull blade doesn't work unless the sages are reawakened and the sword is re-imbued with power, as we have seen time and time again. The tools in which to access the sages and the sacred realm change throughout the story, but the sacred realm does not change. Only the sages do. As time progresses forward, the sages must change from both a living state and a deceased state, and those who are deceased must be moved on if another sage were to die prematurely. In order to understand the magic of Din, we first need to set up some form of timeline of creation on the planet. We need to go back to when the planet was created. From what we understand in Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, Din's magic created the earth. Feore's magic created the winds, the life, and Nehru's magic set up the order. This makes sense to the context that I've already established in understanding how the planet would function. Feore's magic would have been what created the people. Nehru's magic would have been what created the understanding, the knowledge, the wisdom. And Din's magic would have what set up the landscape. It would have set up the world that they would have existed in, the power to move rocks. These different entities would then have some form of conflicts, and I believe that these conflicts started off by creating different individuals, or in this case, sects of people. You could easily assert that Din's people would have been the Gerudos, and the Hylian people were Nehru's, and the Koroks were Feore's. But we can take that one step further, as that has a lot of speculation and different entities simply commingle, and there definitely seems to be an understanding that just because you practice one magic doesn't mean you can't practice another, which makes sense to the grander scheme of things, and I'll get into that. If we take a look at the justification of Link, Zelda, and Ganon, we could easily state that Feore's powers were probably the most important in the context of starting off the world. Feore's magic would have been that of creating life, and Nehru's magic would have been creating the knowledge, the consciousness, the understanding, the wisdom, the need for some form of semblance. This would have allowed people to congregate, and having free will, they can learn and practice the things that they wish to practice. This might have created some form of distraction, so instead of having a commingling of people, each one would have their own representation in prayer and religion. I'm not stating religion is why these nations fell apart. However, my guess is the goddesses created somebody like Link. Link was a protector of the world and was the first step, a swordsman, to protect from the segregation of these people and separation. This then resulted in the birth of Zelda. So these two individuals were created in order to have a yin and yang to each other. It's interesting to think that Zelda and Link might have once been opposites and were in conflict with each other, but if we understand what Feore's goal was, and we understand what Nehru's goal was, then you can understand that Link would have been dichotomous with Zelda. They were the original yin and yang. Nature versus a sense of power structure. During a segregation, Nehru's people, the Hylians, would have segregated from, say, the Koroks. This divide would have also created the first war, a civil war as it were. And I don't believe this is the civil war that is being represented in Breath of the Wild or anything like that. I think this is its own independent thing. It might not even have been a war, but a war amongst the goddesses and not the people, as they are separate entities. Ganon is the creation of power, the Triforce of Power. From what we understand, the Triforces might have already been on the planet before the people even discovered them. As just assuming that people were plopped onto the planet and created some form of religion immediately based on these entities is in some ways silly. But from what we can understand and what we have seen, Feor may have outstretched too far, creating way too many entities, way too much life, creating way too much of this and that, having fairy people and having different races and different things like that in order to appease other goddesses. So Nehru might have requested the birth of the Hylians, and Din might have requested the birth of the Gerudos, and these different entities acted in different ways and prayed to different gods, or the gods who wanted them created, and this led to a conflict of interest. So within the conflict of interest, it's easy to state that Link, born of Feore, protector of the world, and the requirements of Feore, or necessities, or views, or perceptions, or beliefs. Same can be said about Zelda. It is a protection of Nehru's beliefs and understandings and magic. Then there's Ganon. See, from what I can understand is Din, the goddess that created the earth, wanted total rule. In order to have a landscape that is constantly shifting, a landscape that is always in flux, a world of destruction so things can change and be reborn. It is my understanding that Din, or in this case Ganon, is not trying to exactly destroy the world, but in a sense destroy the world so at the greatest cost, a form of peace can be created again, usurping the other two goddesses in order to control the lands, in order to have total control, so that way the influence of the other two can be less direct. In other words, by killing and slaying people in the story, you are directly going against Feore. By constantly attacking Hylians, or going after the Hylian castle, is a direct attack on Nehru. Din's goal was never to be evil as we perceive it, and I'll get into that later. However, Din's creation, Ganon, which is a power in an exact opposite of Zelda in this regard, much like how Link is an exact opposite, but in a completely different way. Ganon is the seeking of all power. If Nehru holds a lot of the knowledge, then it would make sense that power wants the knowledge in order to rule. But Feor doesn't want the knowledge to be controlled. Feor wants it to be distributed and understood in a way to better the world. So Feor has direct issues with Ganon. Ganon has direct issues with Nehru. Nehru has direct interest in supporting Feore for a rock, paper, scissors effect, which is something Moxie brought up and I think is really interesting. And it's something I definitely see in practice within the world of The Legend of Zelda. I talked about malice, but before we get into why malice is involved, I want to talk about why the color theory and representation of color is extremely important. Link uses a form of magic that is typically green and associated with him. The Feor magic is just general magical power. It itself is not a power itself. It needs to be utilized and harnessed in a specific way to be magic. This is why The Legend of Zelda has a lot of influence from music. The music itself, much like wind, is the dictation of that form of magic. It is not a tangible resource. Nehru's magic is a tangible resource. You see time stones, you see the ocarina itself, which might have been made by these time stones or what you have you. But you also have the representation of souls and life with green magic, which is why in Breath of the Wild, the glowstones have the description that they do, being that of the souls of the dead. The dead having green or green-like appearances just makes... Hold on. Well, let's real quick talk about magic as it is in The Legend of Zelda, because we can break it down into three specific things: Din, Feore, Nehru. What I need to state right now is in the Breath of the Wild, it is setting a completely different precedent. We are seeing things like the lightning being utilized in a way that is Feore magic. This can also be seen at the Temple of, or where you get the Sun Song in Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, where the lightning has a greenish hue, as well as in the cutscene in the beginning of Ocarina of Time, where the lightning is shown as green. Although lightning is perceived as plasmatic in real life, within the video game, it is a form of electricity. Electricity can be perceived as a structure of life, a biological life within ourselves. We are bioelectric, we are thinking, we are producing, we are moving. Nerval structures are perceived as electric. Therefore, Feore's magic would make sense to also include some form of lightning magic that was never intended to be used for destructive powers, but ultimately is being utilized in a way for destructive powers. This could just be raw Feore magic in that regard. Also, Nehru's magic is then perceived as a form of water. This is a liquid substance that is seen powering many things. The liquid structure or liquid stuff has a very important understanding in Breath of the Wild, even sustaining Link during his rest. I do believe that it is a combination of Feor's magic as well as Nehru's magic. I do strongly believe, including in Wind Waker, that the spring water is a combination of Nehru's magic and Feor's magic that occurred naturally, something that just occurred from the beginning of time and has always existed. That understanding led to them speculating and creating different types of magic, and this can also be perceived as potions throughout the story as well. So in Ocarina of Time, when you go to get the Sun Song, the poison that is existent in those tombs is a combination of the Shikans working with Feore magic as well as Nehru magic, and ultimately doing more harm than good and getting mixtures wrong, ultimately resulting in something that creates redeads. But I don't think any of this is mutually exclusive, specifically the Lumina Stones, which I think are a combination of all three goddesses. See, you might think through this conversation that we've been having that Din is an evil entity, but again, eliminate villain from your perspective and understand that it is just a goal or a hope that Din has a will upon the world, and everybody shares that will to have upon the world. Therefore, Din's magic is not exclusively evil, it's just being utilized for evil. Its raw form is probably plasma or fire, whereas Nehru's raw form is something like a liquid. Looking at things from this perspective, we can understand why more Feor magic in a Nehru water sense allows you to create a potion. More of Din's magic in a raw form is just fire, plasma, lava, rock, stone, but also it can be the credence of combination with somebody like Nehru's magic to allow you to sustain life. It could be something that is a physical entity like the pieces of heart. Din is not exclusively evil in any context. Din made a mistake, which resulted in evil occurring from a matter of perspective. Hopefully that clarifies things a little bit. Dead. The dead having green or green like appearances just makes sense. But this is also why, in my perception, Poes use fire. Much like the untangibility of Feor's magic and the tangibility of Nehru's magic, fire is both of those things combined. It is both tangible and intangible. It is manipulatable, but also not manipulatable. Fire is a great way to represent Din's magic, and that can be utilized in different ways. If Nehru's ability is that of divinity and the use of divinity in order to find some form of order and semblance amongst all of the characters that we come across in The Legend of Zelda, then it would make sense that the direct issue would be with Feore and Din. Although they all have issues with each other in their own subjective way, Din and Feore have a much bigger issue amongst each other as well as with Nehru. Nehru accidentally created a being who has access to divinity magic. Feore creates a soldier that is an unstoppable force who was intended to be immortal. And Din gets involved with malice. Ganon is the representation and the creation of the destruction, the one who will kill, the one who will slay, the one who will end times. This is a consequence of free will, not exactly the god's goal, but in order to find some form of balance, the world must be burned and started again, a slash and burn effect. Everything must be destroyed in order to rebuild a semblance of divinity amongst everyone in both life and in death. Malice gets involved with Ganon and Din in order to get involved and give Din a fighting chance. And in this case, with the constant seeking of wisdom and the seeking of divinity magic, the use of malice magic against divine magic, in this case Zelda, makes sense. So the people of the world would create and imbue the three types of magic into the Master Sword in order to stop Ganon for their own way of defending against this force. All of these different forces and different types of magic have different correlations and relations with each other in a subjective perspective. Malice is trying to stop divine, or the god. Nehru accidentally creates the god, which then creates the reason for Malice to get involved with Ganon. Link is then given the Master Sword, as it is created by the people to protect them. His goal is to protect both Din and Nehru and Feore. He is trying to protect the world, as his goal is. He is the chosen one, the hero of time. He is the one who is being the most manipulated and being sent through time. It is my understanding that in The Legend of Zelda, especially recently with Breath of the Wild, it is a conversation of Nehru's magic during the war. In the next series, we will understand Feore's magic and why Ganon is constantly being reborn. Feore's magic is being utilized in all three entities. There is a blend of all of the magic that needs to take place in order for anything to work correctly. In order to see the ultimate destruction of the world, one magic must be turned into an imbalance. Ganon's goal has been pretty clear from the start. Either create an imbalance in the magic and take total control by eliminating the wisdom and having access to divine magic, or destroying the world, or becoming an iron fist and controlling everything in some way. Nehru's magic is also very clear. Create an understanding of all of the magic, use divinity to push malice out, and also allow death to happen naturally. Feore's magic goes against everybody's in order to create immortality and a natural world that is just perfect in a sense. But it will never truly be perfect because immortality is both a gift and a curse. I personally think many of these things were overthought by the people who were speculating upon the story, but it is important that the best type of story is the one that you can speculate upon, as the tools and understanding and the context is never given to us directly. We need to piece together the secondhand storytelling that the game is trying to tell us. Now, it's important to note that I haven't even gotten into the story aside from talking about the gods and the goddesses that have some form of involvement in the world of The Legend of Zelda. You can look at things like color theory to appease your understanding, and you can look at things like religious texts to appease your understanding as well. But when you take a look at the context of the game, these greater and broader opinions are the ones that come out and stand out to me the most. Nehru has a tangible magic, Din has a semi-tangible magic, and Feore was the original magic. These kinds of things need to be understood and combined in order to have a world that properly functions. The three goddesses having a feud with each other over their initial beliefs are the reason why the world itself has a conflict over the initial beliefs. And then on top of it, you have the creator of the goddesses getting involved, and the one who wishes to destroy the goddesses getting involved as well. There is a multi tiered divinity war occurring on the lands of Hyrule. Nehru has to fight Din, Din has to fight Feore, but in order to fight Feore, Din needs to fight Nehru. Nehru also can't 100% agree with Feore, but needs to use Feore. Nehru, being that of wisdom, obviously would make the smart decisions in order to work with Feore, but in the end is also against Feore. These kinds of things are extremely important to the context of the story and what we see. However, most importantly, I don't believe that these three magics need to combine for things to work, which is where the corruption conversation takes place. With the Sheikahs creating the poisonous toxins that create the Redeads, multiple forms of magic were combined to do different things. Take a look at the Yiga clan and their use of what I would consider Feor magic and Din magic in order to create blink movements and concealment for different purposes that are not intrinsically useful towards any type of goal. It is in its own abomination of the magics of the world that have been portrayed. And you can also look at Twin Rova and the combination of Nehru magic, which is the understanding of magic and its use, and Din magic in order to create entities, or in this case, the twin sisters, who use different forms of magic in collaboration with each other. This is a hint towards the greater story and the use of magic in collaboration with other magic to find some semblance and find what works. However, from what we can understand, no magic or the use of all magic isn't even an answer. Therefore, there is no greater understanding, and free will is the only thing that can solve anything. A conversation that needs to take place is between all of the goddesses, and this is why the sages were born. The sages were a collection of people who had understandings of different forms of magic. The sages were there as mediators. They were to mediate the situation. If it wasn't for the sages, the Master Sword could be locked away, it could be destroyed, it can be unpreserved. The force magic itself can be destroyed by malice. The sages were in agreement between Nehru, Din, and Feore in order to have a way to fight back against Ganon on the natural plane. The natural plane itself would be Hyrule as we understand it. The Master Sword is a bane of evil. Therefore, within the free will, if malice were to exert any form of control, the malice would be destroyed by the Master Sword, or in this case, a form of divinity by combining the three different types of magic, Din, Feor, and Nehru. From what I have stated here today, you're probably thinking, okay, so Nehru has Zelda, who uses divine magic, which, as we understand it, is the combination of the three different forms of magic. Link also uses divine magic, but in a different way. And understand that when I say force and divine magic, they are synonymous. The Master Sword is created as a tool instead of something like magic itself. The tool is imbued because of the sage's agreement that the swordsman who will be reborn to protect the world will have access to a tool that can stop the exerting malice. Malice is the exact opposite of what we understand as divinity. Therefore, when Ganon uses malice forms of magic, this malice is his form of divinity. The divinity of Zelda and Link are just tools in order to stop the encroaching malice. Hopefully that makes sense. In the end, my conjecture remains synonymous with the ideals that I've put forth. There is a greater religion and conversation being had, and many things are just distractions from the greater story. I'm not stating they're red herrings, I'm just stating that they are distractions. They may have some form of involvement, such as the Twilight Realm and the Sacred Realm having involvement. It is possible that the Twilight Realm or the interlopers or all of the other greater conversations that have occurred do take place and matter. However, understanding what the magic is the first step to creating a better story. And this is a conjecture and subjective opinion, and how I personally relate myself to the magic in order to understand why things are occurring the way they do. I think that many different forms of the magic, whether it's Feore, Nehru, or Din, have been corrupted in a specific way by malice throughout the events that have taken place. And this can be seen with things like the Jaeger clan. There is a sense of malice or corruption that exists within their use of magic and their use of their abilities that are used for negativity. Now just take that one step further into an extreme form. That interlopers could have been a group of scientists slash swordsmen slash warriors, it doesn't really matter, who used magic in a specific way that corrupted who they were as people and ultimately led them to make the decisions that they did. As well as the people of Twilight could be a external entity or a completely different race of people, or it could be a race of people who are completely twisted. Now, my knowledge of Twilight Princess is rather small, so I'm not going to try to put any conjecture onto a specific storyline, as I'd like to discuss the secondhand storytelling a little bit more. And I hope that this video can be used in a way to formulate some new opinions or some new theories as to what is occurring in The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time and other titles that come after it. I personally think that it is important to recognize that the split timeline may be trying to discuss specific events between each goddess, Nehru, Feor, and Din. We might be converging all of these timelines into a trilogy that is currently being produced by the Legend of Zelda staff, and first story was Nehru's, and then we'll have Feor's coming up in the next story, which is going to be most likely a lot darker considering the topics that Feore is a part of. And then we will probably have Din's story arc, or the conclusion of Din's story arc, where Malice either is destroyed or is usurping, or is usurped. We don't really have the context to really put together what is going to happen. But I believe personally that the third game of this trilogy will involve Ganon in some way, and then introduce a new enemy, which will most likely be Malice. Or Demise, rather. I believe his name is Demise. And Demise will then be the final conversation piece, and we will finally be introduced to a being of some form of divinity. Now, there is a lot of conversation about like the Zonai and other entities that exist within the world, and I think that these are just fringe organizations or fringe religions that participate in some way. Much like the Shikans, the Zonai very well could have made pacts with a completely different organization. The Zonai could have been involved with Feore magic as well as Din magic, and that is why they are gone now, and the remnants of their technology is being used by Nehruian magic in order for the Hylian or the Hyrule family to have some form of power over those types of magic. However, if we look at Breath of the Wild, there is a very deep understanding of magic at some point. This is now remnant magic, and we don't fully understand it because we, as the players, were re-entered into the story late. It is very possible that if Link had died before the events of Breath of the Wild, we would have had another Child Link timeline, but the developers chose that the better story structure is to put Link into a comatose state in the future and use time magic so that way they can reconvene the storyline in a way that works and is fitting to the grander story that is taking place upon the secondary storytelling of the past. Now, plot holes will always exist. There will always be things that exist within the story that will say that I am wrong, and that is perfectly fine. This is not a set in stone principle matter. This is a thinking matter. This is a here's what we know. from my perspective of The Legend of Zelda, it seems like the entire story structure of Legend of Zelda is somebody in the future reiterating stories of old. So my guess is Hyrule was not destroyed and will not be destroyed, um, just due to the consequences of how the story has been told thus far. It is possible that at some point we will see a peaceful Hyrule, and then a new entity like we had with Vati will come forth and we will have to fight again. There will be more sub-story to The Legend of Zelda post-Ganon, post-Demise that will occur, maybe a resurrection, or there will be a sealing point where Ganon is purposely sealed away and harmony can be found amongst the goddesses, and at that point there will only be two other entities at war, the Old God and Demise. And this could lead to an extremely interesting story structure in the future that I look forward to. I love The Legend of Zelda so much it's tattooed on my body. I own more Zelda memorabilia than I do anything else. And I hope that you enjoy this story as much as I did. And I hope that this is a fun conjecture that you can look at and maybe develop things further. So you super fans out there who hopefully had some suspension of disbelief throughout this video, go ahead and use this as some fodder. I would love to see it. Debunk me, but let's try to keep things nice and fun. Thank you so much, Moxie, for producing the video that you did, and I look forward to seeing more of your work in the future. I hope if you see this video, you enjoyed it as well. And everybody, please, if you're interested in seeing that, go watch Moxie's video and see the reason why this was made. Another YouTuber I would like to say thank you to is Nintendo Black Crisis, which is also another awesome Legend of Zelda content channel, and Linkus, the speedrunner, who is also one of the reasons why I continue to fall in love with Zelda to this day. Watching Linkus and playing Legend of Zelda while he streams has been awesome fun, and I love this community, and I want to sign off with something really special. If you didn't, check out the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time Triforce ending from the GDQ event. That was another big one that made me cry and was very special to me. I talked about it during my Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3DS playthrough here on the channel. It's just something that represents that this community is so special. And I want to say thank you to everybody who watched this and chose to delve a little bit deeper into some of the conspiracy side of The Legend of Zelda. And this was a lot of fun to make. I did it in the afternoon. The scripting took me forever, but hopefully I did a good job. This is not my normal type of video. So I love you guys so much, and thank you guys so much for your support. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great one, everyone.